Are you afraid to die?
No, no, not at all. And even I would say this is uncomfortable and certainly not very pretty that the in between was as I experienced it then. Depersonalized down to zero with no memory or personality that I could tell or attachment to this place, just sort of free floating, if you will, conscious being. If God said, I need you to go back there and do more of what you were doing in the process of man making, because it's easy to find God, it's hard to become a man in this case. Like this is sacrifice, it's not going to be comfortable, but I need you to go back there and do more of this work. I'd go in a heartbeat.
My guest today is Jim Brutin. He has been fortunate to realize most of his childhood dreams, watching wildlife television programs as a child, then living in Africa and winning an Emmy for his work with National Geographic Television, dreaming of sci fi gadgets while reading through Popular Mechanics, then shrinking a television truck into a backpack, transmitting live video from all 7 continents of the world. His love of vintage aircraft translated from gluing models together as a boy to building and flying of 2 historical reproduction airplanes. It was his last adventures that delivered Jim to the door of his greatest adventure yet, his near death experience. In the in between, as he was told within that experience, now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Tia. It's great to be with you and your subscribers.
Well, thank you. And I'm very interested, and I know my viewers are very interested to hear about your near death experience. If you'd like to start there.
Sure, happy to. As you mentioned, my life's been one of realizing my childhood dreams. When I was little, growing up in the 60s in Florida, for instance, like a lot of other little boys, especially after Kennedy said, we have to go to the moon before the end of the decade. Of course, I was interested in science fiction movies, reading Popular Mechanics when we were all going to have a jetpack to fly to school and a flying saucer car to go to work, all the other stuff. Moon tourism by 2000. But it's just full of imagination and optimism, even with the background of the Vietnam War. And so I knew I wanted to invent something one day, something that was kind of cool and science fiction like. And I got to do that. And I invented my satellite video phone that could, like you say, was like shrinking a TV truck into a backpack. I also loved watching wildlife shows. And there was this one I used to watch and thinking, how do I do that for a living? And now I have an Emmy for work with National Geographic, having lived in Africa off and on for 14 years. I loved old airplanes because my father learned to fly in 62. And shortly after that, a couple of very popular films came out in the 60s, one about a fictional air race across the English Channel in 1910, and then one called the Blue Max from World War One. And I just knew, yeah, that was the period of aviation. And I think it had a lot to do with there was just so much discovery. It was so new. It was kind of like the internet in the 90s. People were just trying everything because, wow, look at this thing. We know we're still trying to wrap our heads around how great it is. Today, I guess it's artificial intelligence. But anyway, I fell in love with old aviation, and eventually, when I settled down from all my world travels, I built a couple of historical reproduction aircraft, one from World War One and one from the early 1930s. And it was that one, the last one called a Flying Flea, cute as can be, uh, designed to be built on a dining room table in a Paris apartment. Like I said, in 1933, and it had to be like the first ultralight in the world. It was so tiny, but I thought, okay, I've done my macho airplane, my World War One fighter. Now I'll build this one because it looks like fun. And it was on my second test flight that I lost my engine. I couldn't make it back to the airfield, but I don't panic. I never really have. And I got the engine started a couple of times and it quit. And eventually I said, well, there's a little pond over there I can aim for because it was very rocky, very forested elsewhere. I overshot the bank of the lake and basically in the equivalent of a soapbox derby car with a big airplane engine and propeller in front of my face. I crashed into all these tree trunks at 70 miles an hour And when I stopped crashing, there was literally no airplane left around me except what I was seat belted to behind me. Everything had been just turned into matchsticks. Um, Luckily for me, this was in October 6th, 2016. So up on 8 years. Um, Usually the place where I crashed, which was a Boy Scout camp, was closed during that time of year. It's October, and we're up in New England in Connecticut. Fortunately for me, there was a man who used that quiet time to go out and enjoy fishing. It was quiet until I crashed right in front of him. Luckily, uh, and rarely on that day, he had his cell phone on him. Usually, he left it in the truck because he didn't want to be bothered, but he had it that day. So he was able to call 911 and kind of keep me propped up and breathing until the helicopter flew in to take me up to Hartford's trauma center at Hartford, Connecticut. And I asked him, I said, was I coherent? He said, no, no, you were just kind of babbling. And he said, and you couldn't really breathe. You were just gasping for air. Well, I found out later that's because when I crashed, I broke all my ribs. I ruptured both lungs. My right knee had multiple fractures. And even there was a cut so bad here that the bottom part of my skin, my lower lip was just hanging down. I couldn't have made words if I wanted to because you kind of need your lips for that. So the helicopter flew me up to Hartford, and man, I mean, all kinds of tubes coming in and going out of me. I was intubated, so I could breathe in some way. And they had me in restraint so that I wouldn't, in my delirium, try and remove the tubing. And I escaped my restraints. They had to re-restrain me. By the time my family got there, couple hours, 3 hours later, they were told, he's a bit of a handful. We have multiple, like a week's long worth of 8 hour operations. We could lose him at any time. We recommend just putting him into a medically induced coma so that he can rest better and we don't have to worry so much about him. And they said, yeah, that makes sense. It's impossible to know, but all I can say is during that 1 week of being out of it, maybe for the entire week, or maybe it's one of those things where you have a week's worth of experience in a split second. I had my near death experience. And you know how a lot of near death experiences are, I would say, kind of passive by nature. You go through a tunnel, you see dead loved ones, you see maybe beautiful landscapes, and then you have a life review, and then maybe you're given a big message or a choice, and then everybody who has a near death experience rather than a death experience return. And mine was very different. There was no tunnel of light. There were no rainbows and unicorns. There were, I would say, if I had a life review, I would say I had something that was similar to one. And mine was very interactive. I was actually made to work. Um, so I would say it this way: rather than a tunnel, it's like I teleported onto a terrace of a very tall building outside. Imagine a post-apocalyptic scene, like New York City 1,000 years after the nuclear bomb goes off or the asteroid hits or something like that. So I'm way up high looking at all this, and um, it's a city in ruins. And I see these clouds above me that are so dark, so heavy, so big. It looks like the mother of all storms is getting ready to unload. And I wasn't afraid or anything. I'm just passively observing. And then I had this wave of nausea go through my stomach. And I said, I don't think I can stand this. And when I said that, I heard this noise off to my left and I looked over, and it was like a 4 or 5 story sculpture of an egg. But imagine an egg that was only made of random lattice work, like strips of metal, for example, and a lot of open air, but the overall shape was an egg. And I could see these little movements from within, and that was what was making the noise that attracted my attention. So I walked over to it because it was the only thing of real interest there to see. And I just knew somehow this thing and I must be connected. So what I was able to do is look through that open lattice work and see these little, like, partial pieces of gears. They're called sector gears. They're meant to move back and forth. You see them in clocks, you see them in, believe it or not, transmissions, but they're not a circular wheel with a lot of little teeth. They're just a partial arc, again, meant to move a certain motion from beginning to end. That's what was suspended freely in the air and just kind of, by the time I got there, just lightly as if they were in idle mode. What was weird is that I could see some were very clear and definite, and some were more ghost-like, but they could just pass through each other unaffected. And I, I looked at it and I sort of took a step back and I said, what is this thing? And that's when a disembodied voice came and stayed with me throughout the experience. And it said, "This is the future birthing into the now." And it said, "This is the process of becoming." And so I looked at the gears and I realized as I looked at each gear, whether it was ghost like or not, it's like a video feed played in my head of, I guess, what that gear represented. And I realized these are future events in my life, not past, not present, but the future, meaning they're the fruit of my past, the fruit of past choices. And I thought, well, I wonder what they feel like. So I put my hand through the lattice for the first time, and one of the gears just brushed by my hand. And when it did, I got that pain all over again down in my stomach. And reflexively, I grabbed that gear, even though it hurt, to pull it back through the lattice and throw it out. And when I did that, all of the gears started spinning around rapidly until they settled down. And basically, you can say it's like a new pattern, configuring themselves for the loss of one. And I said, "What's happening now?" And that voice said, each gear is the probability of a thought, word, or action in your future. Your destiny is resetting itself around what, I've removed, what you've removed. And I said, "How did I know I could do that? Pull that gear out, removing that obviously future moment." And the voice said, "Why else are you here?" I said, "I have no idea. I don't even know what this place is." I said, "You're in the in between." I said, "In between what?" And it said, "Everything, the impossible now between the past and the future." And we've heard that called the eternal now too. And I said, "Well, that just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand." They said, "It's impossible. The reason it's called impossible is it's impossible in its short duration. Yet here you are standing inside the eternity of a single moment." Said, "Do you remember the world to which your body belongs?" And I just really thought hard about it. And I thought, No, I don't. I have no idea." And it said, "Then you see the truth and how the past is dust." And that's what it is to be in that, eternal single moment. And I said, "Okay, why do some of these gears, these futures that I touch, make me sick and not others?" It said, "All choices have unintended consequences, some unfortunate and some not. The pain each brings is your guide." I said, "Well, where are the gears that feel good?" I said, "You're not here to feel good." Again, it could almost sound threatening, but it really wasn't. Um, and as an example, a new gear swung into view. And when I looked at that, I could see, happy grandchildren I would have one day from children, from my kids who were still children. And I could see how they were happy and they were smiling, just enjoying their life. And obviously I let that gear pass by. I wasn't about to remove that one. So I kept really studying what I was seeing. And more gears emerged within view, and some were very, like I said, definite and clear, and some were more ghost-like. And I would say each were bringing their clear images of meaning. And I came to understand that the ones that were very definite were the ones that were closer in time or more likely to occur. The ones that were ghost-like were further out in time or less likely to occur. But each, as I said, had their own images of meaning. And so what I did is understanding why I'm there and what I'm there to do. I was kind of there to stack the deck and clean up my future by removing bad choices that simply won't eventuate and won't be a, let's say, temptation, right? I mean, what if when the gear said, "Oh, on this day, if you buy a lottery ticket, you'll win and make all this money," but the pain might be you're going to also become the biggest jerk. Well, you can imagine a lot of people might say, "I promise not to be the jerk." Well, we'll see, right? Or you could just say, "Here's the pain for making that decision." And it's a very short conversation with the time you have available. So every time, the gears sort of calmed down, I would reach through and using only pain as my guide, not some moral compass, not some prayer, not some mantra, not visualizing some, whether it's Jesus or a guru or whatever, it was pain. So that's pretty humbling right there to say, this is what I've been reduced to. This is all I am the kind of person that can only use pain as that guide rather than saying, look how much better the world is. It's like, look how much better the world won't, which, how much worse the world will not be because you are not going to make it worse. Okay, fine. Let's just go with that then. So, like I said, each time the gears calmed down, I would reach through and find one that when it touched me or I touched it, it felt painful and I'd remove it. And then the gears all resort themselves out. And at one point, I looked behind me and I saw this like pile of growing gears, growing pile of gears. And I thought, oh my God, even though I guess I feel less pain now because my future is getting cleaned up, am I going to die sooner from doing all this because I keep removing these events from my future? And the voice said, your destiny has to fit itself around futures that are not meant to be. And then it said, your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. I said, well, I don't know how comforting that is. It said, eliminating bad choices doesn't mean you won't make wrong ones. Let's face it, with the best of intentions, we can totally go off the rails thinking we're doing something correctly. That's not necessarily a sin, as a bad one with that desire and that intention is. It said, you won't know the decisions are wrong until after they pass. And since right and wrong are variables over which you have no control, the answers to what comes tomorrow are a waste. It's better to understand the beauty of how everything fits and refits together. And that's where I was being told, listen, just have faith in me. Have faith in the grand design. You don't always need to know what's going to come next. It's like the voice was saying, I'm really kind of into the whole discovery process, like watching you all discover things and explore things and that sense of amazement. And I thought, okay, got it. I said, what am I missing here in my lack of understanding? Because obviously I knew this thing was way bigger than me. It said, what is clearly before you? Grace. It said, no one deserves salvation. It can only be given by grace. It is your birthright, but it must be chosen at the expense of the world that separates us. You can't row in two boats at once, right? And I said, well, just fixing my future is painful. I said, and I feel ashamed that I'm not doing it with a better moral compass than pain. I said, I don't even know where or when these futures happen. And the voice said, well, where, when, that's not important. Removing your enthusiasm to further chain yourself to the world isn't as painful as carrying the crushing weight of those chains once they're forged around you. And I said, it's like this place, you think about those mouse mazes. I said, it's like this place was created so I can do one thing and one thing only with no chance to screw it up. And the voice said the most profound thing that anyone's ever said. It said, well, if those with choices make poor use of them, then offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. And I said, well, and then it said, you can't change the past, but you can make better choices in the future. Everything is interconnected. And pay more attention to your relationships. Be gentle with everyone as I am gentle with you. I said, well, what's gentle about all this? Because, again, I'm in this apocalyptic landscape. I have this pain going on in my stomach. That's my guide. I said, well, you prayed for something for which being here is the answer. And now, as you've said before, said, and now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, I took one last look at the, stone gray sky and the dead city. And then I put my hand out and touched the egg. And I said, I think I can live with this now. With that, I woke up in the hospital. And to be honest, later on, when somebody brought me my laptop computer, because as my NDE came back to memory and just cycled through over and over and over with more detail, more of an emotional connection, more of a holy crap, what was this? I started to write it down because I knew I did not want to lose this. And while I was there, I said, let me go back and look at the last emails I wrote or received. And I realized I had no memory 2 days prior to my accident. I had literally had my memory knocked out of me by an amount of 2 days before my crash. And then when I came out of my coma, I would say I really didn't have a working mind for about a week. My family and friends told me some of the outrageous things I would sit there and say. It was as if I were on alcohol, but maybe, that's kind of a residual effect of the anesthesia or the coma drugs or whatever. So it's interesting that this illuminating experience, I'm not saying enlightening, there is a difference, but definitely this illuminating, hyper focused, well remembered experience is bookended on both sides by periods of amnesia. I just find that kind of interesting that it could penetrate through all of that to imprint upon my memory. Well, so I guess as my mind came back to me about a week later, I'm already moved from the ICU over into basically a rehabilitation hospital. Really wonderful staff, 24/7 attention, and I just all I can say is one day I kind of realized, oh, I'm here. And it wasn't any surprise. It was just acceptance. I still didn't, I don't think I still knew had been in a plane crash. It's like, I'm just in a hospital. Okay, accept it, because you're probably still pretty passive coming out of all of that. And as I'm sitting there starting to, I guess, chat with people, um, immediately the memory of my near death experience came. And it was so, in whatever way I have related it to you today, it's like not even 5% or 1% of the intensity of what I was seeing play over and over in my head and the intensity of that experience. And I remember just literally thinking, what is this? And again, it was just over and over and over playing out, kind of like the over and over of all the gears changing until it was like torture after 10,000 times of watching things spin around. And I finally realized, okay, I've had an out of body experience. And honestly, based on probably some Twilight Zone I watched back in the 60s again, I wondered, am I already dead? And this is just one of those artificial constructs. They hold you in for a little while so that you can slowly come to grips with it. I really thought that for a while, for a few weeks. And then finally, I asked one of my morning nurses, who I realized was really cool, had a good energy. I realized sometimes she's hanging out in here a little longer than she needs to because we were just enjoying chatting about life, and it was a connection. And I said, "Can I just share something with you?" And she said, "Sure." So I told her my NDE. And when I did, she started crying. And I said, "Why are you crying?" She said, "You're magical. I don't want you to die." And I said, "Well, first of all, you're a nurse in a hospital. I'm sure you see death all the time." And that's when she said, "You're magical." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you know how everybody's busy here. This is where I'm starting to learn, when people come back and they have, if they weren't psychic before, they are now. And if they were, they're more now. Or they say, they can talk to people who died, things like this." I realized my tweaked up superpower was empathy. And I thought that's pretty cool because remember, I was told pay attention to relationships, and I guess he was giving me the tool to do it. Um, and I said, "What do you mean magical?" She said, "Well, all the doctors here are busy, and I mean, you see it on the news. Doctors have no more than 10 or 15 minutes for a patient. And she said we have the same thing because we have a lot of patients and understaffed for doctors." She said, "For some reason, every day you have 3 to 5 doctors in here for an hour, hour and a half. I walk by the door because I'm snooping, but you're not talking about your medical condition. You're talking about life in general. And one of them wants you to be in business with him so bad, with your leg and its cage hanging up in the air and you doped up on oxycodone, has you on international business calls because he wants you in his business." I've never seen anything like this before in my life. And I'm just sort of taking it all and saying, okay. And I would say that general feeling of goodwill and connection continued for I guess I was in the hospital for maybe 7 weeks. I remember one night around 2 a.m., a matronly nurse came in, tending to my room, and then she reached over and kissed me on the forehead. Yeah, I was pretending to be asleep, but I just thought, how sweet was that? How sweet, how kind. But as I got out of the hospital in late November, early December, and went home, uh, at first I'm sleeping on a pull-out couch on the main floor because the only way I could go upstairs, because I was still using a wheelchair and a walker at the time, was kind of butt hop up the stairs, sit on a bench in the shower, and be able to finally have a nice normal shower. Um, but eventually, people would come by to visit, and I could see that empathy working its magic, with the connections and how kind people were. Because I'm not one of those people who has a lot of friends. I'm, very much an introvert, and it's not like I don't like people. I'm just very picky. But one day once I was back on my feet, I had to go into New York City. At some point, I parked my car and took the bus into the Port Authority, which is, this sort of major nexus for subway traffic as well as buses. And as I was walking through out to the main street, I passed by a coffee shop and I looked at my wife and said, "Yeah, I haven't really had my coffee yet." So I got in line of about 30 people. While I'm waiting, somebody comes out from behind the counter. They walk down the line and they asked me, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'd like this." And they said, "Okay." And they went back and got the coffee and brought it back and said, "No charge." That's what I'm talking about. It was like amazing. So you realize at some point with the NDE, you're not in control of anything. You're not in control of anything. Maybe you have some control of uh, just wanting to get out of bed in the morning and go face the day. Who knows? Maybe you don't have any control over that either. Maybe we're all just down here reading from a script, playing that character as accurately as possible. And maybe on some days that character just didn't want to get out of bed. It's not you. It's just the character you're playing. So anyway, I at some point did come to realize because I'm researching this. At first, I thought, okay, maybe I went to um, the like purgatory, right? But then I realized, well, purgatory wasn't a concept that really existed until the 1200s. And I thought, well, I don't think this is something that just got created in the 1200s. I think maybe the idea on Earth got created, but whatever was going on wherever I was, nah, I got a sense there was a greater sense of eternity to it. And then, of course, the Tibetans have the Bardo, which I think could sometimes be described as the in between as well. But eventually I did realize, oh, I had a near death experience. Okay. So now I start searching for that. And then I found the International Association of Near Death Studies, IANDS. And I thought, okay, well, these people have been around for a little while. Here are, accounts of stories. Oh gosh, look, they have conferences. They have a lot of participation going on. Then I found Assist, which is really for helping people deal with the ups and downs of integrating the experience into their lives after they had it. And, sometimes for some people, their whole life starts to fall apart. So where do you go? I mean, it's really hard to find a therapist who can validate your experience if they haven't had one nor if they believe in one. And that's an experience I had in marriage therapy when, after a year, my then wife said, "We need to go to marriage therapy." And that for 18 months went on until one day I finally just said, our marriage vows said, "Till death do us part." What happens when one of us dies, no matter that we return? I said, "Our covenant is broken. And the only reason we stay together now is because we choose to." Well, that truth was not well received, as you can imagine. But that's the truth. When you've had a near death experience, it's like your near death experience still speaks its truth to you. And you've been drafted. And then you start to realize nothing was put here for my enjoyment. It was put here for my correct use. And it's in the correct use of things that I find joy. You realize that my spiritual evolution really doesn't care whether I like it or not, whether I'm going jolly or I'm going with my head bumping, but it looks like I'm going. And so your relationships change because before an NDE, I would say a lot of people look at life through the filters of their desires. And I think that split second of looking in the mirror of truth, which is what an NDE kind of is, right? I mean, you come back recalibrated. Now you live life looking through the filters of your needs. And as we all know, our needs are few, our desires are pretty infinite. So as you start, I think, to become more in tune with what it is you actually need, yeah, a lot of old relationships are going to fall away that were built upon false or temporary constructs. And there's a 53% divorce rate with normal people in the United States, meaning if you drive through your neighborhood, every other house is falling apart. Man, that's heavy duty. Well, with NDEers, it's 78%. So that's a 50% increase. Now that's like 2 out of 3 houses as you drive through the neighborhood. If 2 out of 3 people had a near death experience. Right now, I think they consider maybe up to 10% of people in the world. And with that incredible statistic that out of what, 7, almost 8 billion people in the world, that 700 million of them, 800 million have had a near death experience, starts to even make you wonder, is this what the second coming could be all about? Because in Luke, I think is it 12:21 says, Many will be those who say, "Oh, here's the kingdom of God. Oh, there's the kingdom of God," as they run from, like, guru to guru or whatever, church to church. And it was said that, the kingdom of God is not a here nor there thing; it's within you. Well, what does an NDE experience say, right? And what do people who have even a broader classification of spiritually transformative experiences, what does that say? And I think at the end of the day, it all really comes down to, we don't come down here to cure cancer, go to the moon, even feed the hungry, doing wonderful things. We come down here for the relationships. Um, and I think it really gets back to when we say, well, things don't make us happy. Well, everybody kind of comes to understand that after a while. It's experiences that make us happy. And usually it's because they're with other people. For example, 30, 40 years from now, a lot of people may not remember with all the detail you would think they would have their first car, the car they were just dying to have, because now it's independence for them and they can go around, they can go on dates, they can go out with their friends, they can just go do what they want to do independently. But you will always remember your first trip to Disney World, guaranteed. And how much fun. And that's why people keep going back. That's why they take their kids back. They're trying to relive that part of their childhood. And again, talking about relationships, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina in August of 2002. Well, I was there the whole summer because my mother was in independent care that became assisted care, 88 years old, taking a little while to pass on and die. On the day she died, that morning, I was in sort of a de facto meditation. I don't usually sit still and meditate. I usually go out for a drive in the country with a cigar, and that's how I meditate. But in this case, I was in bed. And that sort of magic hour between like 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., I was all of a sudden realized I'm having an out of body experience. And I'm talking to the soul who is my mother, meaning we're both out of our body. And it's like we're reliving. Before she went, she wanted to share with me again what our mission in coming here was. So it's kind of like, before we were both born, wherever we were before, we were talking. And I remember this sense of incredible excitement from her. Me, I was kind of more, okay, whatever. I was more matter of fact, but she was really jazzed about coming down to earth or coming into earth. And she said, okay, here's, she didn't say, here's the kind of life we're going to live. Here's what I'm going to do. And here's what you're going to do. She said, here are the emotions we are going to experience together. That was her path of milestones through life. Like, I'm going to come down first. I'll grow up. Now I'm going to be your mom. You're going to be my baby. And then I'm going to raise you. You're going to be my son. And we're just going to have fun. And we're going to feel these feelings. Feelings was the reason we came down here and had a relationship. And if that doesn't say relationships are everything, I don't know what does. And the in between said, pay more attention to your relationships, heighten my empathy. And now I'm having this out of body experience, understanding before my mom left why we did this all in the first place. How cool is that? Kind of brings you up to the present. I'm down in Mexico now. I've written based on my near-death experience. I got to meet some wonderful people, become friends with like PMH Atwater and just a bunch of other really great folks. And experienced, some of the funny outward anomalies that happen after an NDE, like electronic anomalies, just all kinds of crazy things like that. A lot of synchronicities, had some beautiful synchronicities that when the people saw what was going on, they knew something magical is happening here, as well as me. And it happened in such a way that I really couldn't own that moment. And I even told them, I said, the way this occurred tells you no one owns this moment, meaning everyone owns this moment. And just really, it's like planting seeds where you can, or just getting out of the way while they do their own thing. But after writing a couple of books, being on a lot of different podcast interviews and a couple of television things like on Amazon and Gaia Television, I realized that so much of what's going on in the NDE world now is people telling their stories. Like, I had an NDE and this is what it was. And maybe some of them then, based on some heightened ability, create workshops, and then they They, try to make a living off that. And I said, okay, that's fine. But that's not me. I think one of the other things is when we talk about living authentically, um, I think that's because you can't live a spiritual life unless you're living an authentic life. I think we can find a lot of examples around to prove either side of that case we want. And so I think part of my authenticity is being an introvert. I just kind of wanted to disappear out of that whole scene a little bit and not be so prominent perhaps. And that's not an ego statement. It's just I could see it and I said, I don't really want that. So I've moved to Mexico, married a wonderful doctor here, and she was a widow with 4 kids. Talk about a superhero. Um, Never heard a fight in the house. So everybody gets along great. It's really wonderful. And she and I have just built a stem cell lab. And so we're looking at growing and helping people with stem cells. We're also doing some things with prototype lasers that combine a bunch of different wavelengths that have never been done before to excite molecules in a way to accelerate healing. So we're really doing some cool, almost science fiction stuff down here to help people. But my drives and my cigars still continue, and it's nice to be with you today and just having shared my story.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear your story. It is amazing. I've never heard a story quite like it. And there's a lot in there that I kind of want to go a little bit deeper into, unpack a little bit. You said there was an egg. The whole kind of landscape to me sounds sort of steampunk. Was that kind of like the
Yeah,
vision, like when you think
let's
of
say,
it?
yeah, because think about a lot of steampunk could be kind of dark and gray, but it's definitely like the gears, the machine look of what I was experiencing, and let's put it this way: without knowing more about you, Tia, I mean, you could have had the same experience, but maybe you're in a beautiful garden and me removing like the bad gears is you removing weeds until now you have nothing but beautiful flowers and they create these patterns. So I think where I went was specifically constructed for me, the talk about the messenger tailoring the message to the audience. And that after I left, poof, it was gone. It was just literally for the time I was there. Uh, so yeah, I don't think you're far off to sort of say it's a little bit steampunk, a little bit of Jules Verne style or something like that. In fact, one thing I didn't mention was when the gears moved, there was a sound to them that, when a roller coaster is going up that hill before the drop is going clack, 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 clack. That was the sound the gears were making. So yeah, kind of steampunky, I
Do
guess.
you have anything or any affinity for steampunk, or what do you feel like maybe that message was? So, if mine was a garden and yours was this dark
Sure.
kind of gear oriented, is there a symbolic meaning that's special to you about that?
Not not specifically, but I would say implied is the fact, I built airplanes. I would say, I have sort of a scientific engineering frame of mind and perspective. In other words, I did really well in physics, but not so good in biology, total loss in chemistry. Built a couple of airplanes. I know how gears fit together and things like that. So I think again there was a familiarity there, and also building airplanes was all about discovery. Remember, I said I loved those early periods of aviation because that was this age of incredible discovery. Well, what was I in an NDE to do but to discover? And as I said, I was even told, I'm really kind of into you guys discovering stuff. So it all kind of fit, but on a subconscious emotional level. Um, as far as anything else there, um,
What about the egg? Like, was the
I
egg
think it's
symbolic for
perfect.
like rebirth or birthing
Yeah.
of the future, or?
Well, think about it. I mean, the egg was the construct. You could actually say it was encasing my destiny. And since all these events within were from what is an egg, but the potential of the future, the promise of the future. So it's perfect. It is so poetically perfect that encasing my future should be something that looks like an egg.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think that is, I love to kind of dig into the symbolic meanings about things because I think we see things so symbolically. Even in this earth realm that we live in, everything that's happening to us, I feel is a symbolic representation of something else in a deeper reality.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Sometimes,
Well,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just love what you're saying because sometimes I say, sometimes the thing isn't about the thing. And it's by not taking things personally and sort of being in a partial, even though you're a participant, still seeing things from that quiet observer mode, that you can stand back and see a bigger picture that allows you to make the assessment you just stated.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So in your dark city with the gear filled egg, do you feel like that was a place on Earth, like a screenshot maybe, or still of somewhere on Earth since it was out of time?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. At the time, I said, nah, but that was in 2016. We just had presidential elections and we've had one other since, and now we're swinging back to have another this year. I would say the world certainly seems to be in more. I mean, I've always said, when you see people standing out on the sidewalk saying the end is coming, a friend of mine actually said one time, no time is worse than the one you're living in. So I get that. However, it seems like we have a lot more turmoil going on in the world today. I mean, just, the urban decay in the United States and in Europe. I mean, COVID certainly seemed to have thrown a wrench in a lot of things, especially in terms of power structures within work, within politics, within big business, with even maybe families with each other. Um, and right now, with the whole Ukraine Russian thing, and is Putin going to attack, you know, other countries in Europe? Is China going to take over Taiwan? How are we going to react? I guess the headlines today would indicate that maybe I was seeing a scene in the ultimate future, the end point of the future. I don't know. But at the end, let's face it, whether you lived in the Roman Empire, whether you lived in Atlantis or something, or whether you lived in the Old South or in Germany in just prior to World War II, we can certainly say empires come and empires go. They always have and they always will. And this isn't our true home. And if someone were to say, oh man, why did I have to be born right now with all this turmoil? I'd say, well, think about it. If the truth is this, that you're really not who you think you are, that everything you think you are is left at the door when you die, then let's imagine you're more than that. So let's say you're this soul who chose to come down here or was sent down here at this particular time to live this particular life as this particular person. Well, if you think about it, aren't there some movies that we might go and see because the climax of the movie was this huge disaster? Remember in the 70s, like the Towering Inferno or the Poseidon Adventure, or why are people fascinated by the Titanic? That contrast between first class travel and then suddenly, you're swimming in 24-degree water for 4 minutes until you die. Uh, I think that transition that creates that climax could be a reason that a lot of people, I'm going to say it, chose to be here right now, because the best seat in the house is the front row seat where it's an interactive movie. So again, kind of like what you were saying, it's like, don't take it too seriously. Do your best, but realize that based on what I said before, are we really in control of anything? Just do your best. I would say as much as is possible, act without desire, but it's okay to act with intention. It's okay in your actions, in your choices, to have good intentions. But desires kind of make you more of a doer, and it can sometimes bring more of a price.
Yeah, you were having communication with someone or something over there. They were talking to you. You heard a voice. Do you know who that voice was? Was it familiar to you?
Well, it's one of those things that kind of appears in your head. And in a way that, how we might say so much of our life is about projecting our worlds upon everyone else around us. Imagine, imagine you met this famous movie star you just thought was awesome, super awesome, or, like Taylor Swift these days with the music. And you're just so in awe of this person, what they've done, maybe for a moment, you're very self aware how you're really aware of every projection you've had about who this person is and why they do what they do. And everything you could possibly imagine, every angle covered. Uh, Now, but then imagine that all of a sudden upon that projection screen, new information is coming, but you can't say it's coming from that person. You can't say it's coming from yourself. It's simply part of the projection. And it might be information in such a way to minimize the projection so that you can now see more through the filters of reality and see things more clearly as they truly are. So some of the infatuation maybe diminishes in that clarity. That's kind of how it was. But let me say this to kind of try to answer your question a little more. There are a lot of perspectives that say, hey, we're already one with God. Hey, we're already in heaven. We're just choosing to focus our attention here and do what it is, we've come here to do. So if that's true, then somebody could say, well, was that the voice of God? And say, well, maybe it was the voice of me, a more evolved, simultaneous sense of me, because we're already there. So it's kind of hard to say. But I will say this, there was very much a matter of factness to the voice. There was no menace in any sense. It was more like some very patient friends I've had. Maybe these were times in the past and the voice was speaking through them and nobody realized it. But you could just imagine imagine like when you're an adolescent or something and you're thinking, okay, my parents are asleep. I'm going to sneak out at night and go out with my friends. Imagine on your way out the door, your mom or your dad are in the kitchen making a sandwich because they got hungry at, like midnight. And imagine they see what you're doing and they know what you're getting ready to go do. But imagine they just looked at you and said, just don't do anything you can't walk away from. And they go back to bed. It's that tone that was in that voice. And to me, that was just so cool. It was totally non-judgmental. It was totally not, you're going to burn in hell if you don't do what I do. It's not anything like that. It was just so compassionate and so understanding. And it only said what it needed to. It wasn't verbose. And like you said at one point, it's really about experience.
And on that note, you talked about how maybe for a couple weeks after you woke up, you felt like maybe you were in this holding cell or in some kind of limbo, that you had already died and it was a transitionary experience for you. How do we know that we're not there? That we're
Well,
not there right now, that this whole life isn't that?
it kind of gets back into the whole, current theories being bandied about that we're in a simulation, like we really are living in the matrix. Uh, the thing is, when you ask that question, I could simply point to Eastern religions, like whether it's Sikhism or whether it's Hinduism or whether it's Buddhism. It's like this world is an artificial construct. And the souls come here to, like I said, it's kind of like experience Disney World, ride the rides. Well, then some are actually interested in going behind the rides to see how the gears turn and the valves work, and if maybe they can figure out a way to make it work a little bit better, a little more smoothly. But in that sense, you have two different sets of people on two different sides of the exact same ride, but they're having a totally different experience of what's going on. And one's infatuated by the colors, the sounds, the rides. My guts being strewn here and strewn there in the roller coaster. And now I want to go eat the turkey leg or the hot dog, and let's go to the water park and let's just ride every ride we can. And there are plenty of people who work for these theme parks who you could probably hire as a guide to say, I'll take you on every ride you want and I'll tell you the history. But then there are people, like I said, who are literally behind the scenes working quietly to make sure that things are working as they should. And, and that's the part that's not about the fun. It's about the mission of making things work as they should. And I think the near-death experience is a little bit about moving from one side to the other of the ride. But like I said, I do think that whether this place is a totally artificial construct or not, it's real enough to engage with and to grow from. Look how real playing video games are for some people, so much that if you say, quit playing them, they get violent, physically violent. That's pretty real. So, like I say, so in a sense, in a way, it doesn't matter. I would say that since I kind of agree with what the Tao Te Ching says and what John Milton, who was a famous English philosopher in the 15 or 1600s, said, that the highest aspect of God is that which is not yet manifest. That it's in the manifestation that you came to have the yin and the yang, or everything else we see, what they call the 10,000 things, which just means everything. But if you really want to go home, you really want to be at that nexus of all possibilities, because that is where it's not, the choice has not yet been made. The action has not yet been taken. The thought has not yet been thought. That is the unstruck music. You're in that state of potential. And even now, you can get an idea of that. Like, if you put off making a choice or a decision until the last possible minute, you have approached that moment in time. And this is, to me, it was symbolized by the gears and the egg, that you've waited till the last possible moment, allowing for just-in-time communications to come in, or feeling differently about something, or just anything. A new opportunity may come up that supersedes. In quantum physics, it's called superposition probabilities. And I think the more closer you wait to when a decision or a choice has to be made, the more clearly you can see what those superposition probabilities are. And that was me referencing how some of the gears were very clear and very definite. I think they represented the more close in time, or the more likely of those possibilities. And sometimes, if you wait just long enough and it's the right kind of opportunity, you may not really have to make much of a choice at all, because things will eventuate on their own. And that is in the Tao. It's called, basically, by being the right kind of person and living the right kind of life, it is basically, the action of non-action. And that's where it says, the wise man does nothing and yet leaves nothing undone, whereas the foolish man is always doing and yet leaves much to be done. And we've seen examples of both.
For sure. And when you were pulling out the gears in the egg and it was hurting your stomach, why do you think it was hurting your stomach specifically? Was there something?
I think that's because that's where my emotional center is.
Okay, that makes a lot
It's
of
not in
sense.
my heart. It's like if somebody hurts, like I can remember being a child, and when you're a child, you're in elementary school, somebody's always hurting your feelings, or you miss mom or whatever. It's just always something going on. And I just remember that's where I sensed my emotions, was in my gut. And then when I had my first heartbreak in my early 20s, again, that I just felt really nauseous there. Didn't want to eat, didn't want to drink. And so I think it was just, for me, that's naturally where the seat of my emotions lies.
Do you feel like you were actually, or let me start here. Do you feel like you actually made a difference in your life by pulling out those gears? Do you think you really did remove some unhappy or unpleasant experiences from your future?
Yeah, here's a big one for you. I think I removed the gear of my marriage, because it was not to my spiritual betterment to continue in that relationship. It would be to my spiritual detriment by being in it, because she was not keen on my NDE. She wouldn't even say its word. She would just say the plane accident. And
Um,
so, and one time she even said, well, because if you think you've had this experience, you're not perfect now. I said, you don't have to be perfect to have a perfecting experience. You don't come back, like, enlightened. I said, all you do is you've had your feet pointed in the right direction. Out of the 360 degrees you could walk, and you're told, just take one step after another. You have no idea what the second step is going to be, or the third step. And it's not important. I just need you to take that one step. And that's what I guess you could call faith. But it's a faith that's built upon hearing and seeing and experiencing. And so eventually, if somebody says, do you have faith? I say, no, I have knowledge. I have experience. It's like saying, do you have faith that, like, if I turn on the shower, I'm going to get wet? It's like, I don't think it's faith at this point. I think it's been proven. And that's
yeah.
kind of where it becomes. And like I said, I don't pray for anything, because, like I said, for me, it's not a transaction. I have no crisis of faith. And if the creator of the universe doesn't know what I need and when I need it, and yet I get this NDE, how does that add up? How do you do that math?
Are you afraid to die?
No, no, not at all. And even I would say this is uncomfortable, and certainly not very pretty, that the in between was, as I experienced it then, depersonalized down to zero, with no memory or personality that I could tell, or attachment to this place, just sort of free floating, if you will, conscious being. If God said, I need you to go back there and do more of what you were doing, in the process of man making. Because it's easy to find God. It's hard to become a man in this case. Like you like this is sacrifice. It's not going to be comfortable, but I need you to go back there and do more of this work. I'd go in a heartbeat. Um, mhm. That's it. Because I would say, whether I got an Emmy, whether I built my cool old airplanes that have gone out. Well, the first one that didn't crash is out winning awards because it's really beautiful airplane. Uh, Knighted by the King of Malaysia for using my satellite telephone stuff at Mount Everest. I became an NBC News war journalist. All these really cool things that for a lot of people might be a single lifetime achievement. I and I don't say that proudly because, like I said, I'm hiding out here in Mexico. It's not like I'm chasing the spotlight. I would say that for all those things, being basically an anonymous soul in the in between, I was the best version of myself. And I think it kind of almost gets back to the hero's journey. When we talk about the hero's journey, we talk about the person who grows up comfortable in the village, something comes up, they leave the village, and on this journey they take, because there's always a journey, they get the crap kicked out of them. And the only reason they get up is because if they don't, they're going to die there. No one's coming to pick them up. They're going to starve to death there. So they get up and, as hurt and beat up as they are, they keep going. And then they have this transformational experience where they really leave that old sense of self behind and embrace this new sense of self. And about that time, they start to meet allies on the journey. It's not necessarily their journey, but for a while they can walk together. And that's, I guess, what it's really like.
We're all the hero in our own journey.
And we love the heroes who get the crap beat out of them. We don't generally have stories of heroes who are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. I guess you could say Buddha might be a little bit that way because until he was 29, he was raised in a palace. He was a prince. He never even had seen an old person dying. And then on 29, I think from the back of an elephant or something, he saw it and goes, "What is that?" And from seeing the world as it truly is in that flash, that really started his journey.
Yeah, he was privileged, but he went out and left the privilege so that he could find himself,
Again,
enlightenment.
seeing life through the filters of his need rather than through the filters of his desire.
Exactly. It's been such a pleasure to have you on. Do you have any last positive words of wisdom for my viewers?
Well, I think the first thing is feel free to visit my website. It's www.inbetweenproductions.com. And my two books are on Amazon. The In Between, Trip of a Lifetime, and then The Practice In Between, The Art of Letting Go. Because that was certainly a big part of the message that has come through me is about letting go. You're not in control of anything, so just learn the art of letting go. And I think it's summed up in a couple of things, and these will be my last words. One, I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the samurai, these legendary Japanese swordsmen who could fight with a sense of sacrifice. And they were like truly legendary. And there's an old saying that on the field of battle, when a samurai draws his sword, but he throws his scabbard away because he'll never need it again. On this day, he is free. And the other thing, and I was told this from the in between, is said, all the all the force of will you will ever need is found in the art of letting go. Always live life in celebration of the individual spirit. For no one and no thing can stand before the brilliance of a truly naked soul.
It's very powerful and beautiful. What a wonderful message to share. Thank you.
Thank you, T. It's been nice being with you all today. Have a great day, and I'll look forward to seeing what we've done when you're ready to publish it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. You have a great day.